Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, hoping you're enjoying this Super Bowl Sunday and your weekend. Welcome to Kentucky Newsmakers. Later, Lexington Herald leader reporter Sam Youngman hanging up his reporter's notebook, at least for now. He'll talk about what his ride has been like back in his home state after covering national politics in Washington. But first, a national political story this week originates here at home. Kentucky's U.S. Senator Rand Paul has dropped his campaign for president. He's focused now on his re-election bid, where his Democratic opponent could be Lexington Mayor Jim Gray. The Gray camp quickly tried to take advantage, saying in a news release that it is time for Paul to pay attention to Kentucky. The release went on to say that Paul's presidential campaign ended in shambles. Senator Paul obviously has a different perspective, and he joined me for an interview from Washington shortly after announcing his end of his pursuit of the presidency. Senator, thank you very much for being with us. You picked up a delegate in Iowa. Some might call it a solid showing there. Why did you decide now is the time to suspend your presidential campaign and apparently turn your attention to the race here in Kentucky?
Well, you know, it was an amazing ride. We had the last day before the rally, we had 1,500 kids at the University of Iowa cheering and shouting, and it was just so encouraging to see so many young people coming forward to join our campaign. But when they added up the votes, there just weren't enough to win. There's at least 3 people well ahead of us, and we just didn't think we had the momentum to go on to win. And I'm a big believer in trying as hard as you can to win. I continue to want to promote the message, everything that I stood for in the presidential election, but I think it's time that I bring that message and continue that message, you know, in the U.S. Senate. And I'll continue to advocate for balanced budgets. I'll continue to advocate and fight against the president's war on coal, the president's war on Kentucky jobs, and I'll continue to say that we need a more reasonable foreign policy. But I think it's time right now that what I emphasize is that I can do that from the U.S. Senate as well.
Will you endorse another candidate for president?
No, I'm going to spend my time promoting and trying to encourage people to turn out for the presidential caucus, and I think it wouldn't be good to endorse somebody, so we're not going to endorse somebody. I'm just going to keep promoting the message that I've talked about, but it'll be more a message that I can do closer to home.
Do you leave this race with regrets as to having brought a voice to the discussion that you fear will now be lost in the campaign for the White House?
You know, I think that I'm going to continue to have a voice in the national stage. I think others who will try to get the votes that we were getting will try to emulate the message that I have put forward. And I really think for the first time there really is a discussion in the Republican Party about, you know, whether regime change is a good idea. Was it a good idea to topple Gaddafi in Libya? Did it make us safer? Did it actually put us more at risk for terrorism? This is a very thoughtful discussion, and I think that I brought it to the forefront in the debate, and it will continue to be part of the debate. I'm proud of our performance. I think that we brought something to the Republican debate that was needing, and we'll continue to be part of that. It'll just sort of be in a different venue.
You made reference there will still be that caucus in Kentucky on March 5th. It's being held because you convinced the Kentucky Republican Party to hold a caucus, that is to shelve their primary so that you could run for your re-election as well as run for the presidency. Do you have any regret about that and the fact that this caucus will now go on with you not an active candidate?
You know, actually, I'm very excited about the presidential caucus. For years and years, many of us have been disappointed that Kentucky has no say in who gets to be the presidential nominee because our primary has been so late. Often the decision has already been made by the time people come to Kentucky. When we have that on March 5th, it'll be on a Saturday. I think we'll be the only caucus that day. I suspect there'll be a lot of candidates that come to Kentucky and try to convince Kentucky voters. I personally will be in Louisville the Thursday before the caucus at a Lincoln Day dinner promoting the caucus. Then on Friday, I'll be in Bowling Green promoting the caucus. So we're excited about it. I think it gives Kentucky a say in it and actually will be a great organizational tool for us to connect with voters because it's a party event. We're going to try to develop a newsletter list so we can get more Republicans active in the Republican Party.
As you begin to look at this race back home, which you now have the opportunity to focus on, Senator, both parties have primaries. You're obviously the best known in your party, and in the Democratic primary, Lexington Mayor Jim Gray is running at this point, obviously has the resources and some name identification. Are you prepared to face him in the fall election?
You know, I'm going to run on my record. I think I've been true to my word that I've been running to try and working to try to prevent the government from spending too much money and spending us into oblivion and bankrupting the country. I've personally, I think, set a good example in that my legislative office has returned $2.4 million from my own personal legislative budget to the Treasury to try to help combat this government that's overgrown. I'll continue to fight for privacy, for the government not to be collecting our phone records, and I'll continue to be a loud voice against the President Obama's war on Kentucky coal, President Obama's war on Kentucky jobs. And so, no, I think that really at this point, we're excited about running on my record, and we'll be bringing it. I'll be doing a 25-city tour, some of it in the Lexington area, some of it in southeast Kentucky in the next week when we have a recess with the Senate in about a week from now.
To be on the road back in Kentucky. Is this day for you somewhat of a relief because you can now focus on your campaign back at home, or is this a day of disappointment to you personally?
Well, you know, a little bit of both. Obviously, I wouldn't have done this if I didn't think I had something to offer, if I didn't think that I would have made a great president. But you have to listen to the voters and really decide what happens based on what happens with voting. And so, but I am excited to spend more time at home. I will enjoy being able to mow my grass a little bit more and tinker around in the yard. Also, will enjoy spending more time, you know, one-on-one with people. But the interesting thing is, throughout even the presidential campaign, I still have made it a policy to do lots of town halls and get out there and engage with the voters, and also a policy to make my votes, to really be an active participant and an advocate for Kentucky by being here in the Senate to make my votes.
What would you say to anyone who has observed this presidential campaign going forward at this time, what we should be watching in these weeks ahead as the Republicans head toward their nominating process and the Democrats make their choice?
You know, I continue to think the most important problem we face in the country is our debt. We're borrowing $1 million a minute. I think it threatens our economy, but I think it's so significant it actually threatens our national security, because I don't think you can be a strong nation. I don't think you project strength from bankruptcy court. So I do think that's still the biggest problem that faces us. I'll continue to talk about it in the Kentucky Senate race, but I hope the presidential candidates will focus on it as well.
Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, on this day that he announced that he is dropping out of the presidential campaign, would you ever do it again? Would you ever run for the White House again, Senator?
A bad time to ask someone when they've just gotten off the trail for doing so many appearances. But at this point, you know, it's a great honor for me to be in the Senate representing Kentucky. I'm going to continue fighting for Kentucky jobs, fighting against, you know, President Obama's overreach in our coal industry and everything else. But I'm proud of our run for the presidency. I'm also proud of my service as a senator, and I'm going to continue fighting for Kentucky jobs and for a balanced budget.
Senator Paul, thank you. We appreciate it, and let us know about that 25-city tour. I'm sure that our news crews will catch up with you along the way. And thanks for being with us. Now, former Lexington Herald leader reporter Sam Youngman talks with us on politics and his future, and later Kentucky's response to the Zika virus on Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Former Lexington Herald leader, political reporter Sam Youngman is joining us now. Sam grew up in Kentucky, went to UK, then went on to report on national politics based out of Washington. And a few years ago, he came home to Kentucky. Now he's decided apparently to leave again. More about that a little bit later. But first, Sam, welcome. It's good to see you. And your last day is done at the Herald Leader, right? Yeah.
I know that former is going to take some getting used to. I think I can empathize a little bit with Rand Rand Paul, you know, wistfully looking back.
Well, while that's fresh on our minds,
Sure.
your reaction to Senator Paul's decision to drop out of the presidential race, a surprise that it happened this early?
Yeah, I think so. I was surprised. Now, obviously, it makes a lot of sense. It wasn't adding up for him to keep going, but I really thought that he would stick around through the Nevada caucuses, just because I thought that was a state that was sort of tailor-made for him to do well. Obviously, he didn't see a path forward. I do think that Mayor Gray's entrance into the re-election race got his attention. I think he felt like he needed to focus, but it just wasn't happening for him. You know, from the beginning, when he announced in April of last year, it just never really took off.
Yeah. Do you think that he would run for the presidency again? You heard his answer, and it was a non-answer on that question.
I was in Washington when he gave his 13-hour filibuster of CIA Director John Brennan, and at the time I said, okay, I'm setting the over-under on the number of times Rand Paul runs for president at 3. So I'm still taking the over on that one.
Does this, his departure, though, sort of a remove from the dialogue in the Republican primaries and going forward in their nominating process, this sort of libertarian viewpoint from at least what's being discussed?
Yeah, you know, I think for all the flaws his campaign had, Rand Paul did bring a unique perspective to the debate stage, especially as the Republican Party has sort of reverted to its more muscular foreign policy posture. You know, Rand Paul was, you know, sort of pejoratively called an isolationist, but I do think he brought a different perspective to that debate, and I think it will be missed.
How closely is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell watching the Kentucky race, and do you think that there was maybe some subtle pressure from him for the senator to focus on his re-election campaign, because he's, you know, his job is on the line as well, and the Democrats obviously have fewer seats to defend this year than the Republicans do.
Well, he's got an enormously challenging map if he wants to keep this new majority. I think Rand Paul has been a concern, but mostly because I think Senator McConnell would like to be able to take this Kentucky seat, put it in the safe column, and leave it there so he can focus on other states. You know, Florida is an open Senate race this year, and that is a very expensive, very time-consuming race. I don't know the extent to which Senator McConnell was pressuring Rand Paul to get out of the race. Remember, he endorsed his run. But I do think he's probably breathing a sigh of relief that Senator Paul has come home and focused.
But the Democrats did get their candidate in terms of someone who has resources and some name recognition in at least a large geographical area in Lexington Mayor Jim Gray. It's a crowded primary, but they were obviously trying to lure somebody to take the position of what was supposed to be Auditor Adam Edlund's run this year.
Yeah, that's right. I think they did get somebody who they think is a viable candidate, somebody who has a personal wealth that he could inject some funds into the race. You know, I think the only people really wanting Rand Paul to keep running for president were everybody working for Jim Gray. You know, by getting in as late as he did, you know, he didn't get in until the filing deadline. Democrats really sort of squandered whatever sort of head start they might have had while Rand Paul was distracted with another race. Of course, Adam Edlund losing in November had a lot to do with that. But now I think, you know, they're starting off as much as you can in an increasingly red state. I think they're starting off on even ground.
You heard me ask the senator. The caucus in Kentucky goes on, the one that he convinced the Kentucky Republican Party to hold. Is that March 5th caucus in Kentucky likely to just be a wild card scenario?
I think so. I mean, I think there are obviously some national candidates you look at that would fit well here. I think, you know, if you look back last time in the 2012 primary, Mike Huckabee did very well here. So we obviously have a very conservative streak. I would expect Ted Cruz to do well here. I would expect Donald Trump to do well here if he's still in the race. The thing is, we don't know what the race is going to look like that point. The set of primaries and caucuses just before us, the so-called SEC primary, where it's all southern states, you know, that's going to leave that's definitely going to shape the race. So I don't know what it's going to look like when it gets here. Now, if I'm Rand Paul, you know, he told you he's not going to endorse any other candidate. If I'm him, I stick my finger in the wind, figure out who's going to win this thing, endorse them, and then take credit for bringing them across the finish line.
If there's some clear trend in the polling, right?
Right.
All right, so this caucus will come right before the special election coming up in Kentucky, where the Republicans are hoping to at least hold those 4 seats, 4 special elections. They believe by the by the end of this year, after the November elections, they will control the state house for the first time in 95 years. Money's flowing into the state from elsewhere. They have a good shot at that?
I think so. I think it's inevitable. I really do. It's one of those things where there's this feeling of suspense, but the suspense feels manufactured. I feel like this state has been moving right for a long time now. It sort of paused in the wake of the Fletcher administration, but now I think it's full speed to the right. I think I tend to agree with Senator McConnell when he says it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
The Democrats have a new chairwoman in Sandy Overly, and the Republicans have a new governor in Matt Bevin, who will both likely be factors in this election year ahead, wouldn't you think?
I think so, and it's a lot easier to raise money for your party as a sitting governor than as a newly elected chairwoman. Look, Democrats are in a bad spot right now. They've got a lot of questions about their future, how to proceed, and really I don't know that there are any good answers for them. It may be a situation where you've got to burn the building all the way down before you can start to rebuild it.
What has been the highlight of returning to Kentucky?
Oh gosh, working with you. It's there have been too many to count. It has been.
You had never been to Fancy Farm.
I had never been to Fancy Farm.
Yeah.
That's got to be among the highlights. I love the parades. I loved walking in parades with candidates and watching them interact with Kentuckians. But I mean, my whole career, I've been so blessed to see the things that I've seen. Journalism has opened so many doors for me, and that really just continued here in Kentucky. To be able to ply my trade in a state that I love, among people I love, it was just, I'm the luckiest guy in the world.
How difficult is it to cover politics in the state where, as Lieutenant Governor, former Lieutenant Governor Kraig has said, Kentucky is a state where everybody knows each other. It's like one big small town to some extent. Does that make it more challenging?
It added wrinkles that I had not anticipated. There were times when a family member was supporting a candidate and they didn't like what I'd written, so it makes for an awkward holiday. Different things I had never encountered before. I think when you're working in Washington, there's the criticism, but you get the feeling that it's all out there. Here in Kentucky, when you're working up close with people, the criticism can be right in your face. So that took some getting used to, but on balance, I wouldn't trade a second of it for anything.
The old journalism adage is that if both sides are complaining, you may have gotten it about right.
Then I must have gotten a lot right.
What's next? Can you say?
I can, yes. A good friend of mine opened a small PR firm a couple of years ago, and he offered me a partnership. After spending my entire adult life chasing politicians around, I felt like maybe it was time for a change.
All right. Well, good luck to you. We thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for everything you do.
Well, we appreciate that, Sam. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Stay with us now. Is Kentucky responding? In what way are we responding to the Zika virus? Is it something we should be concerned about in Kentucky? It's coming up on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers on WKYT. You've heard a lot about the Zika virus lately and how Florida has declared an emergency in some counties. The World Health Organization and the CDC are responding. And in Kentucky, the state is also monitoring the situation carefully. Dr. Kraig Humbaugh is the Senior Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Public Health and good enough to come in and let us know where things stand. Thanks for coming in, Doctor. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
How concerned should Kentuckians be about the Zika virus?
Well, most Kentuckians are not at risk for contracting a Zika virus infection. However, Kentuckians that have recently been to affected areas of the world where the virus is circulating, could potentially be at risk if they're bitten by an infected mosquito there.
Should anyone consider their travel destinations at this point, with this disease factored in?
Well, the CDC is recommending, especially for pregnant women, that they should consider whether they want to delay or postpone their trips to affected areas of the world. And maybe we should talk about what those affected areas are. But it's now 30 countries. It seems to be geographically expanding in the mosquito population, especially in Central and South America. But it's also found in some other areas of the world, such as the Cape Verde Islands off of Africa and in the Samoan Islands.
Is it not spread by human contact, other than there is the sexual contact? I think yes is the answer to that, right?
So the main way that people get Zika virus infection is through the bite of an infected mosquito. However, it's not surprising that potentially if somebody has an acute infection with Zika virus and the virus is circulating in their system, that blood and body contact with that person could pass the disease along as well.
How is the Commonwealth of Kentucky monitoring the situation at this point?
Yeah. So we've had several calls about people who have gone to the affected areas, and we continue to talk with healthcare providers. We've issued some advisories to healthcare providers and, of course, a press release to the public. If people do have to travel to areas that are affected, then we certainly recommend that they take precautions against getting bit by mosquitoes. Some things that they can do are, number one, wear long sleeve clothes, of course, wear approved insect repellents, and be careful about getting bit by mosquitoes. They can also sleep under mosquito tents or nets at night if they're outdoors.
What are the symptoms to watch for if somebody does contract it?
Yeah, that's a great question, because most people who do get Zika virus infection are either not symptomatic at all or have very, very mild symptoms. Some of these symptoms can be, however, fever, rash is caused by Zika virus infection, muscle aches, joint aches. Those are some of the symptoms of people who do see symptoms with Zika virus infection, but in fact most people do not.
And in the worst case scenario of these birth defects that have been happening, what is that? What is the situation?
Well, I think that, and that's a great question, because I think that's why World Health Organization declared an emergency, because what scientists and health officials are seeing, especially in Brazil, as Zika virus increases in that country, in mosquitoes and in humans, they're at the same time seeing an increase in birth defects. Specifically a birth defect called microcephaly, which just means small head or brain size. And investigators are trying to determine, is there a link between these two, the rise in Zika virus and the increase in microcephaly in babies born to women in Brazil?
So that correlation is not concrete at this point?
We don't know that it's causal right now, but it's certainly something that has us concerned and worried.
You know, this came upon us quickly, it seems. I mean, has this been something that has been watched by healthcare professionals longer than it has been in the attention of the general public?
Well, Zika virus has actually been known since the 40s and 50s, but it hasn't been a virus that's circulated in the mosquito population here in the United States. And it's not until recently that it's expanded its geographic range into Central and South America and the Caribbean.
There is no vaccine at this point. Is something being developed?
I think researchers are looking into that possibility of a vaccine, but as you say, there's not a vaccine and there's not a specific treatment for Zika virus either. The treatment right now is simply symptomatic treatment, treating the symptoms of one that gets the virus infection.
Well, something you'll certainly watch, keep reports on.
Yes, we'll keep watching it. We should mention that we have not had any reported cases of Zika virus infection in travelers from Kentucky who have gone to affected areas. We're monitoring that.
There was the family in Haiti. Has that all been
We haven't had
confirmed?
any confirmed cases
Gotcha.
at this
Okay.
point.
We had other news, other topic. We had a report of some illnesses in Estill County where apparently salmonella is suspected. How does the state respond to scenarios like that?
Yeah. So it's not unusual for us to do investigations of potential foodborne illnesses, and salmonella is usually transmitted either through food or through water. And in this case, we're working with a local health department to try to find out what the potential source of these infections are, if there are commonalities in the exposure patterns of the people who are sick there.
Flu season appears to be mild so far. Is it too early to say that?
It's really too early to say because flu season does in Kentucky last from about October until May. It seems like a really long time, but in some years we actually see a peak in February or March. And in fact, over the last couple of weeks, we've really seen an increase in reported flu here in Kentucky. So we went from what we call sporadic activity, which is very little activity, to regional activity this last week in terms of our flu. And Centers for Disease Control and Infection issued a warning and alert saying that they have seen cases, severe cases of flu in some places in the U.S. among young people, either teenagers or young adults, and especially among a certain strain of flu. But the good news is there's plenty of flu vaccine out there, and these strains that are circulating are covered by this year's vaccine. So it's really not too late to get one. However, folks need to realize it does take about 2 weeks after the vaccination to produce antibodies that will protect against the flu.
So the flu shot was a pretty good match this year for what's out there.
It was a great match this year.
What else should we know as Kentuckians about our health right now? We have our challenges, don't we?
Well, so we talked earlier about Super Bowl Sunday coming up,
right.
And this is probably a great time to remind folks with parties coming up to prevent foodborne illness, keep cold foods cold and hot foods hot. So if you're not eating a hot food, put it back, or a cold food, put it back in the refrigerator, keep it at appropriate temperatures. Make sure that you heat all meat products to appropriate temperatures before they're served. So there's a lot of food safety messages that we could talk about in terms of keeping people safe and healthy over the Super Bowl weekend.
There you go. So think ahead, be excited for your team, but also keep some things in mind.
That's right.
And of course, don't drink and drive. I know you want to leave that message.
Certainly.
Thank you so much for coming in, Doctor. We appreciate it, and it is interesting. We'll keep up with you on this Zika situation and others, and we appreciate you being here.
Thanks. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers here on WKYT. Of course, the Super Bowl is coming up later today. Live coverage from CBS on WKYT, and of course our newscasts available for you throughout the day as well. We'll see you on WKYT this morning, bright and early. We start at 4:30 with the latest news, and we hope you make it a good week ahead.